'Tis I, Alexis de Tocqueville, back from the grave. I have been commissioned by the French President, Emmanuel Macron, to evaluate the American college system. I have chosen, as the subject for my report, the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Much better. I have chosen UMass Amherst as my subject. My previous work, Democracy in America, focused primarily on two things: the state of politics in America and the attitudes, customs, and political culture of the Americans. To assess UMass, I will use a similar strategy, looking at the logistics of classes, but also the culture among the students. I have interviewed 3 students and will interlace their interviews throughout the video.
I'm Nate Pinkham, English major, and I'm a junior.
Hi, my name is Chris, and I'm a chem major.
And what year are you?
I'm a first semester sophomore.
Very cool. Hi, my name is Paul Kleiner. I'm a junior, first semester junior. I'm a psych major, and I'm in the honors college.
I will try to cover 3 main areas, in this order: learning context, knowledge assessment, and motivation. There is no defining feature of the UMass class. Some are small, typically using a participation-friendly large circle arrangement. Many are massive, using an auditorium style conducive to direct instruction. Unfortunately, these large classes can sometimes stifle student participation.
English professors tend not to call on anyone. They like people asking questions, but most people don't because they're scared, because professors are scary people.
A serious problem with the UMass lectures are the lack of interactivity and activities. Students tend to listen without doing any meaningful processing, likely forgetting much of the information more quickly than if they had mentally manipulated it in any way.
So a lot of the times, students, they just sit in the back and they look at their computers, and they just go there because they can do their iClicker or fill out something in class that gives them attendance points. The best of the large lectures will use things like breakout groups. I've had a couple classes that do like mini discussions, but a lot of them don't. I'd say most of them don't, especially for gen eds. I've been in a lot of smaller classes, especially with honors, and there's a big difference when you have 20 or 30 people in a room. You can't just go there and zone out. You actually have to participate.
Generally, the smaller the class, the more critical thinking is required during the lecture.
But it could also just be pointed out that because there's like a low class population, that you have to think, well, not that you have to think critically, because you should do that in all classes. It's just that it's required, I guess, more general. I don't know how to phrase it. I could just blame.
Large classes are not all bad. They're good ways to teach large numbers of students, and they're very cost-effective and efficient. But they have a number of serious flaws. They're hard to grade consistently, they're hard to give feedback, and they can create a sense of depersonalization. Online homework embodies almost all of the flaws present in the large class lecture system.
The homework is really shallow. I mean, some of the readings were pretty cool, but a lot of it just all the questions just pretty much revolved around memorizing what you've read.
Online homework is often forgotten quickly, requires little critical thinking, but is well suited for short questions with numerical right or wrong answers. While it represents the lowest point for a UMass education, the labs and discussion sessions balance them out.
So the labs force you to work together and solve an issue, and you might not know the answer beforehand, so there's a lot of discovery learning going on.
Labs and discussions emphasize meaningful understanding and application of ideas, and engage multiple metacognitive skills, such as task initiation and planning. Labs in particular require creation in order to make a lab report, a skill at the top tier of Bloom's taxonomy.
Yes, so I don't think people relate how much money they spend at UMass to each class. If they had to hand a $20 bill to the professor before every class, they would get fed up with no PowerPoints and, bullcrap tests. People just don't think about how much money they spend.
The overriding feature of UMass and many colleges is very often inconsistency. Having good or bad professors can make or break a semester. Interestingly, the students do not demand a high level of teaching for their money. It is simply accepted that some professors are good and others bad. Knowledge assessment is a broad topic, and I'm going to try to focus on one issue which is emblematic of many others: diminishing returns.
What are the main things you're being graded on? Do you have exams? Do you have essays? Do you have PowerPoints and things like that? Like, what's usually the thrust of your points?
So while it does vary minorly between classes, it's mostly essay and paper based.
With essays, it seems that they are graded idiosyncratically, but the idiosyncrasies are communicated ahead of time via rubrics and assignment sheets.
You kind of get a feel based on what the teacher is, if what they're asking for in grading. You can always go to them in office hours and get a better clarification of what they're grading for. Teachers overly harsh, they lay out exactly what they're grading for and stuff like that. I think in general you could tell that this paper, like, minimum meets a B or whatever, but whatever determines the A paper, like that top paper, would come down to whether you hit more of the professor's check marks or less of their negatives. So I would say yes, the inconsistency is there.
A major issue with the assessment is the point of diminishing returns. Simply put, it's easy to get a B minus, B, or even A minus, but to get an A requires a disproportionate amount of effort and often luck.
So it's like when you get a study guide for a test, it gives you like 95% of the test. You need to get a 93 or higher, so there's usually like 20 or 30 questions a test. So if you miss one or two questions, then you're already in the A minus range. And the problem is, almost always, like 70-80% of the time, professors will put out a study guide that gets you an A minus, but there'll just be one or two questions that had nothing to do with the study guide that are in there, and it torpedoes your shot of getting an A unless you study like crazy.
Here are the main issues I see with diminishing returns, or a lack of consistency. It undermines the self-efficacy of students by making the outcome beyond their control. It masks learner diversity by funneling all students into a similar grade range. Professors are given a skewed to the middle view of their students' abilities and preparation. Most importantly, it provides a direct incentive not to study. Good grades are a powerful external reward. Damaging the connection between time spent and grade received can reduce students' efforts to achieve their reward. Hopefully, the students have an internal motivation, such as having high expectations for themselves as a college student. If not, the student's work may suffer. However, UMass has a way to offset this through other, easier assignments. This solves the issue, but can result in a level of cynicism among students. Diminishing returns is representative of many teaching and assessment issues at colleges. It is easily fixable through known means, yet compensated by other things. Some professors understand the issue, others don't, presenting another example of the inconsistency of standards, an inconsistency accepted by students. In the end, it demonstrates the need for universal standards across classes, and for students to demand more for their money. UMass provides a good value relative to other colleges, and this issue could be fixed if more students were interested in fixing it. The solution to this issue is well known. Many professors have, through hard work, created assessments that do not suffer this issue. This same list can be applied to most other problems in assessment. It tends to be pretty universal.
I feel like at a certain point, English majors, they've kind of given up or resigned that they're just going to be managers at like a Taco Bell or something.
Motivation is rarely discussed by college students, but lack thereof is a massive issue.
There's the people who care, which is, I think, very limited and select breed, where the teacher, in a sense, is actually connected to the student, which is, like it's a few students per class maybe, or a rarity entirely. Or there's the students who have only done English papers like that and have only tried hard on English papers like that since middle school, high school, etc. So many years that they don't know how to do anything different at this point.
It seems that many college students are motivated by extrinsic goals, not intrinsic ones. This is especially true when you consider that an end grade, a degree, and a job are all extrinsic.
It just seems like the name of the game is getting your degree so you can get a job. And if there are optional readings or extra stuff that you can do, if it doesn't help your grade, then there's no reason to do it. It just doesn't matter, right? It's not going to help you get your degree and get your job. And I think a lot of people think that way.
Having high intrinsic motivation and low extrinsic motivation makes a student likely to fare better in a number of ways. They have higher academic achievement, more self-regulation, participate in more extracurricular activities, and have a greater sense of belonging.
No, that makes perfect sense. That's
Whereas in the physics class, while the tests were multiple choice and you didn't get any partial credit and the questions are pretty rough, I enjoyed a lot of it. And even thinking back, even when I said I really hate this class because I'm doing bad in it and I got a C+, it's like, it kind of like made me think as like, wow, I really have to like understand this and get on a really deep level with the course.
While Chris didn't receive a great grade, he seemed to enjoy doing the classwork itself. It's likely he experienced flow, an inherently rewarding experience which is simultaneously challenging and rewarding. In the absence of a good grade, the optimal difficulty of the tasks made the class stand out as rewarding in and of itself.
Although sometimes they'll just get so confused in lectures, I'll just kind of like bang my head and go to office hours, and he'll always just kind of explain things patiently and with an earnest feeling to it.
While excessive difficulty does seem to hurt intrinsic motivation for a student, strong challenge paired with good teaching and accessibility seems to create both a personal connection with the professor and a productive, intrinsically motivated mindset about the class.
The hardest class I ever had was with this professor who taught behavioral neuroscience at the honors level. I had to study like crazy. I spent hours on these essays for it, but I learned more than in any other class I've taken. And I always felt like when I did work, it was graded personally, and that it wasn't just part of like a machine.
Bill Gates has recently begun speaking about America's high college dropout rate. The U.S. has the highest college dropout rate. We're number 1 in terms of the number of people who start college, but we're like number 20 in terms of the number of people who finish college. College students are expected to pick a prudent major financially, yet at college they are then expected to study to learn, not to simply maximize their grades. It seems that the best way to build their intrinsic motivation is through a personal connection, a recognition of their needs as individuals, and most importantly, through difficult but fair, rewarding work. At UMass, education is inconsistent but often great. Most teachers offer solid lectures, reasonable tests, and a high level of, in one form or another, availability for extra help. Students are extrinsically motivated in broad terms, but often engage themselves in challenging, personalized classes. The biggest threat to the quality of the education and the motivation of the students is the lack of an even standard for all classes. It is a cultural norm that a bad professor is allowed to be bad, with very few students speaking up. As I leave now for France, I have no worries about the future of education in Amherst. What problems there are have already been solved by many professors, and the education offered at UMass is well worth anyone's time.